Is it okay if I interview you for a project?
If you interview me for what?
A project I'm doing?
What's the project?
It's an interview about the 1960s.
Oh, yes.
Uh,
Not the 70s?
no, not the 70s.
Because I remember all the 70s. But I remember 60s, too. Go ahead, shoot. Want to
Okay.
do it over the phone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the first question is, was anyone in your family part of the counterculture or the hippie thing?
No.
No? Do you remember what the hippies acted like, though?
Yes, they were what I'm going to call free spirits.
Okay.
They necessarily, they were not, how can I say this? Responsible people. Often they didn't hold jobs. They, let me see, I'm going to say this. They dressed, very wild. Often, and they smoked a lot of dope.
A lot of dope?
Yeah. A lot of marijuana. They dropped acid. They experimented with mind-altering drugs. They were druggies.
And then...
And not necessarily alcohol, although a lot of them were. Substance abusers. But I think they were mostly, if they didn't have jobs, they would drink a lot of wine, cheap wine.
So, like boxed wine?
Like what?
Boxed wine?
No, cheaper than, I never drank it, but I know it was like maybe $1 a bottle.
Oh.
And it was flavored. I'm trying to think. I never drank it. I wasn't a big drinker, so I'm trying to think of what it was called. But it was really cheap. Boone's Farm, I think it was Boone's Farm. It really inexpensive wine. I mean, really, really expensive. I mean, the type that at that time, it was unusual to have a better bottle of wine that you needed a corkscrew to open where with the Boone's Farm, you just unscrewed it And they, like I said, women wore a lot of, some were, the beginning of the 60s were shorts. I mean, shorts. And then the hippies came out with long skirts and they just were sloppy looking.
Mm.
I think they were what they call, free spirits.
Yeah.
We didn't like, I'm trying to think of the words I want to use. Because I wasn't like that, so.
Right.
I was conservative. They were non-conservative.
So were they more liberal?
Very, very liberal. Very liberal. Yeah. Free sex. A lot of free sex. A lot of them would buy up vans, old vans, and they would put mattresses in the vans, and they'd sleep in their vans. I got rid of a couple mattresses. I just put them out front because I didn't want to have them hauled away. And by the next morning, it was gone. So somebody probably went by in a van and threw it in the back of their van and made beds out of them. Yeah. And they really didn't care where the mattresses came from. And they were scavengers. They would, if you were going to throw something out into the garbage, they picked up a lot of their stuff that way. Which, my stuff was not good stuff. It was for junk.
Right.
They'd pick it up. Yeah, they were very against the establishment.
Can you also tell me your views on the Vietnam War?
My views?
Yeah.
I think all wars are, especially the Vietnam War. I was against it. I'm just not for wars.
Yeah. And did you believe it was okay for it to be televised?
No. And a lot of our men came back with severe drug problems. And that's the only way they seem to be able to get through that war, is to be high all the time.
Yeah.
And that because it was a very unpopular war.
Yeah, that's what I learned.
Pardon?
That's what I learned.
It was a very unpopular war.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you grew up in a family where your father, your grandfather, went to war because they were soldiers, they were trained to be soldiers. They probably had a different outlook on the war.
Yeah.
I personally I'm against the war, any war.
Mhm.
Too many of our guys come back with mental problems, and of course physical. In being in a popular war, when those men came back from Vietnam, they were treated very poorly. They weren't treated as heroes.
Right.
And so many of them came back with illnesses that we had never had. Your Papa one would know that. He was in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like World War II where we were actually bombed.
Really?
Pearl Harbor.
Oh, yeah.
Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Where, nobody came here. Now, in 9/11, of course, the militants did bomb us. But we hadn't been bombed since December the 7th of 1941. So they weren't protecting us when they went into Vietnam.
Yeah.
So it was very unpopular.
How did you and your family react to the JFK assassination?
Oh, we were all devastated.
Yeah.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
Thanks. Get out of here. Okay. Okay, so what's the next question?
Do you remember the first televised presidential debate against JFK and Nixon?
Yes, I do. Yes. JFK was, first of all, a good-looking man.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a very excellent orator.
Yeah.
And he photographed well. And when he was having the debate with Nixon, he dressed to flatter himself. He looked good. He looked better. He looked confident. Where Nixon looked pale. He looked nervous. And of course, he did come across as confident. As Jack Kennedy did. And actually, Jack Kennedy had a harder fight being Catholic.
Yeah.
So many people really believed that the Pope would come over and try to run the United States.
Really?
Oh yeah, and they believed that whatever the Pope said, if Kennedy was elected, then he would have to do whatever the Pope said because he was Catholic. So President Kennedy had a much harder being elected.
Yeah.
Even though he was well liked, he was very well liked, and he was exceptional, like I say, speaker. He displayed confidence.
Right.
And of course, after he was elected, he appointed his brother as Attorney General. So here you had two brothers in the government, which, was something new.
Right. Now, did you like that John F. Kennedy was Catholic?
Did I what?
Did you like that he was Catholic or no?
Oh, it really didn't matter to me because I liked other presidents that were Catholic. I mean, religion never played a part of it to me. I mean, the fact that he was, and it was interesting because he was. But I didn't vote for him because he was.
So did you vote for him or Nixon?
Oh, I voted for him. I didn't. There was just something about Nixon I didn't care for. I wasn't impressed with Nixon when he was
president.
No, I didn't like him when he was president because he was a jerk. The only one good thing that Nixon did was promote what they call ping pong diplomacy, because he opened the door for the Chinese to become a part of the world society, where they isolated themselves. They didn't venture out into the world trade. But I mean, I know we do trade with them, but I don't like it because it has hurt our economy. And now, just about everything, at least what I've got, that is made in China isn't high quality at all.
Yeah.
And that went all the way through the 60s. I did like some of the music of the 60s, the beginning of the 60s. But when they started with the hippies and their music, some of their music was just too. You couldn't. That's when they started where you couldn't understand the top 10. Although Motown came into play, you could understand some of the Motown singers, but when they became, that acid rock, couldn't understand any of the acid rock. Then they started, as far as music went, they started to go off the wall. I mean, I didn't particularly care for some of those entertainers. In fact, most of the entertainers, other than Motown. Well, the Beatles. I started liking the Beatles. And a lot of the English that came over here from the United Kingdom. I guess I was just too conservative.
Yeah.
This was in certain things. I can't get you were a goody two-shoes. I go, well, some have to be like you, some have to be like me. I was.
Mm.
You know.
Right. And then the last question is, were you aware of the civil rights movement and its leaders?
Yes. Yes. Mainly because one of the women that was killed, a white woman from Detroit, and she was going to be a part of the march by a group of black, and she was killed.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, their story was so well known.
Yeah.
It was on television when like black students were being refused into universities, especially in Mississippi. I mean, and the Ku Klux Klan that did an awful lot of personal my words aren't coming to me today. They did bombing of churches, black churches, and it killed young children.
Yeah.
And when all that came out in the newspaper, and of course they wore their hoods, so nobody knew who they were.
Mhm.
You know, which was, you know, so totally unfair. Well, the whole thing was unfair.
Yeah.
I mean, they really believed that the black people were totally inferior, and they wanted them exterminated. They only wanted them as slaves, and once they were no longer servants or slaves, they wanted them dead. They just didn't want them walking on this earth. And they also would do whatever physically they could against any white people that would help them.
Wow, that's terrible.
It was. They did it to priests. They did it to different denominations of ministers. Yes, they would kill them too. Yes, that's how much hate. And a lot of it was in the South, where black people couldn't go into white restaurants or use the white people's restrooms. They had to drink out of their own water fountains, and then besides for black people. In the South, they would say for Negroes.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure that went on as much in the North, but in the South it did.
Yeah.
And I still think that in some places in the South, they're very much against black people.
Still?
Yes. Oh yes. When you get south of the Mason-Dixon line. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I know that because I've been south of that Mason-Dixon line. And it's like, you know, those people know. They have license plates that have the Confederate flag on it. And a lot of them have the Confederate flag out. They publicly display it. So you know they are very much against the black. And some will openly talk about it.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Not all. But, you know, some do. Which, you know, but yet I also believe too that often the blacks feel that the whites owe them something.
Yeah.
And, you know, you know, it's like reverse segregation.
Yeah.
Can I call you back in a minute?
That's the last question.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Grandma.
Love you.
Love
Bye.
you too. Bye.